Hello, everyone, and welcome to this February webinar, which is the second part of our series on entering different international markets. First of all, my apologies that we're starting a little bit late, and thank you so much for everyone's patience, and I hope everything will now go according to plan. So my name is Jetske, and I am part of the Mentoring Women in Business team here at the Cherie Blair Foundation. So first of all, I would like to check whether everyone can hear me properly. If you can, it would be great if you can leave a comment in the chat box on the left, or if you could send a thumbs up so that we can see. Yes, I can see a thumbs up. Thank you, Rashmi. I think that is all working well. If anything happens with the tech during the webinar, so for example, you don't have any sound or there's no image, then I advise you to first write this in the chat box on the left side of the screen, just to see if anyone else is experiencing the same thing. If it's just you, then I advise you to exit the webinar, close all the browsers that you have open, and then try to restart the meeting by using the link that was shared before. And if that doesn't work, then also know that we are recording this session and I will share the link on the forum very soon so you can rewatch this session at any time that you want. So let me quickly run through this outline. So we have 3 speakers that will be giving an introduction on their different markets or different regions. First of all, and I'm sorry for the mistake in my agenda. First of all, we'll have Vaibhav, who used to be a consultant with Ernst & Young, Canada's advisory services practice, and who has now moved on to start his own startup. With his extensive experience working in an international setting, he will be talking about the East African markets, especially Tanzania and Kenya. Then we have Asma, who is a program manager at the Corporation of General Contractors in Quebec and a founder of a startup that offers a choice for women in rural areas of Tunisia. During the panel, she will be talking about the North African and Middle Eastern markets. And finally, we have Perla, who is a Mexican entrepreneur working on creating quality business opportunities for women business owners, which ultimately advance sustainable development, equality, and talent diversity. She will be providing us with insights into the Mexican, American, and Canadian markets. I would like to thank our panel in advance for sharing their expertise with our network. In a moment, I will hand over to our panel, starting with Vaibhav, to give an introduction into their regions. They'll talk about the trends of the market, do a SWOT analysis to talk about strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and talk a bit more about cultural considerations. The second half of the session will be completely open to questions for the audience. During the webinar and during the questions and answers session, please feel free to share your questions and comments using the chat box on the left side of the screen. The panel will then answer your questions during the Q&A section. I will now hand over to Vaibhav to start the webinar.
Hey, thank you so much, and hello to everyone. First of all, I really applaud all of you for taking a step towards entrepreneurship. I think one, it's exciting. Second, it's challenging, and third, the rewards are high. So let's move on. I'll go to the next slide. Yeah. So I think this was a when Cherie Blair Foundation talked about a webinar like this, it was a lot of memories coming together for me. Time I spent in these two countries and the challenges and while we had a lot of work, we had a lot of fun as well. So I thought it's a great way to start our discussion. Quick introduction about myself. I was a senior manager with Ernst & Young, initially with the Indian practice and then transferred to the Canadian practice. My area of focus has been on advisory and consulting practices specifically. And I have traveled widely, with a significant portion of my time spent in Kenya and Tanzania. And yeah, so that's you have my credentials there on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. Happy to connect uh, at any point in time if you want to discuss or talk about any of these regions. Um, Next slide uh, for me. Yeah, so I thought this if you look at these two countries together, uh, you'll quickly see a lot of synergies in terms of the size, the distribution of demographic, graphic distribution, and even the typical sectors they are flourishing in. So the quick takeaways I would have from these slides is number one, it's a young population, uh, and and not only young, even if you look at the 0 to 14 years of age, which is 38 to 45%, it means this is a population you would potentially have an opportunity to target in your coming years. The number two takeaway is the economy is pretty decent. 5 to 6% GDP is a good GDP. There are opportunities to grow. The number three important takeaway which I see here is the sex ratio, which is pretty much aligned. So kudos to that. The service sector is huge. It's 40%, which is a good indication, I would say. Uh, although and a lot of countries like China and all, they focus on manufacturing, and this is a difference between the newer markets where service sector seems to be growing faster than the traditional manufacturing industry. So these are a few takeaways I wanted to highlight. And the last point I want to make here is the strategic location of these countries. For example, Kenya is a great hub in the open market, which I think and especially with the Mombasa port, which is a great entry and exit point for exports and imports. So that's on the slide. Next slide, please. Yeah. So the next two slides, we thought it will be good to talk about the strengths, weaknesses of these two industries, these two countries, in terms of their economy. How do they promote entrepreneurship? uh, I will talk about the Kenyan uh, 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 country in detail, and then Tanzania I'll quickly pass through because a lot of synergies and kind of opportunities they have and the challenges they face, given that both of them are high on agriculture. Uh, Both are neighbors, so pretty much the climate and is similar. Uh, so starting with Kenya, some of the strengths that I would which I would like to highlight here is number one, it's the number one African common market, which means that it's a central point for a lot of trade that happens in that east region. The other important point to look at is the the population is growing faster, with the middle class going at a faster rate, and this is typically true of a lot of developing countries or regions. And Africa is seeing a increase and emergence of the middle class, which means that the buying power is increases, and the uh, take of uh, products and services will be there. And also the benefit that developing markets have these days is the leapfrog even on technology. uh, and that's where digital or any of these new technologies would actually leapfrog, and you will have opportunity to capitalize faster as compared to developed markets which have gone through the cycle. uh, they For Kenya, the port of Mombasa is very strategic. It sells finished it, and the biggest market for Kenya actually is Tanzania and Uganda, where they sell a lot of finished goods. The Kenyan shilling, or the currency, is pretty stable. It has been stable to the US dollar, and it seems to it will continue to be stable. The Revenue Authority is focusing on technology, which means that they are focused towards transparency, and ensuring compliance, which is a good indication and should also help cover some of the threats that we're talking about on the right hand side. On the weakness side, some of the challenges we are aware of, like violent outbreaks, and the lack of infrastructure. But I actually think about it from some of the examples, or big successes in Kenya. For example, the lack of infrastructure actually promoted a service like M-Pesa by Vodacom, uh, Safaricom, sorry, and M-Pesa was a great one of the great success stories, which for Kenya, because one, the the country is challenged with banking infrastructure, and that's where M-Pesa came to found a spot. So which means that while we have these weaknesses, they automatically correspond to opportunities for entrepreneurs to think about solutions. And then to support some of these initiatives, and that's where I move to the opportunity side of the framework. We talk about some of these initiatives or entities like Youth Enterprise Development Fund, Women Enterprise Fund, and so on and so forth, where the government is supporting options for entrepreneurs to uh, open shop there. At the same time, all the social issues that we talked about and some of these threats, they automatically translate into opportunities for entrepreneurs. And the last opportunity I would actually say is challenging in terms of infrastructure. For example, e-commerce is a challenge there, where infrastructure is a problem there, and that's where the small to medium entrepreneurs can bud in terms of digital solutions. Now, having said so, there are threats that impact the Kenyan and Tanzanian market, which we have seen in the past, where small companies have had a challenge scaling up. Because what has happened is traditionally when small companies have scaled up, but they have not been able to scale in terms of productivity gains or efficiencies. So that's where one of the peculiar challenges in Kenya come in, and where small companies find it hard to scale and grow, and that's where the government or the regulations need to make a conducive environment. The other challenge that both Kenya and Tanzanian market faces on the ease of doing business. Clearly, the way down the ranks. So that's an area of work that potentially these governments need to focus on. Skilled labor is also a challenge in the African market, and that's where in Kenya and Tanzania market, and that's where having labor or skilled resources from outside comes out to be pretty expensive. So that's one threat, or that is impeding a lot of companies to grow within the region. So that's on the Kenyan SWOT analysis. I can go to Tanzania. Next slide. Uh, Here I will not like go through all the strengths and weaknesses again, because they are very much synonymous to what I talked in Kenya. Typically, because of the region, they are closely connected. They are neighbors, and uh, the even this break split of GDP is very much similar, except for Tanzania has a little higher split of tourism versus Kenya. Agriculture is common to both of them. They both are affected by the climatic behavior. And what is critical out here is, especially in the opportunity sizes, where for entrepreneurs it will be important to explore what are the grants and what are the platforms that the government is providing. For example, SIYB is a specific program that is available in Tanzania. And likewise the SIDP, which is basically a policy that was developed for small to medium enterprises and supporting existing in industries. So likewise the National Microfinance Policy, which covers provision of financial services to smaller micro enterprises in rural areas, and it's primarily for rural and as well as urban. So yeah, I think next slide. So the reason we have this particular, uh, slide here was the idea was to provoke some thoughts where and I can actually share an example from one of the clients that I was working with who acquired, a lot of, although it's a large client, they acquired a lot of operations in the African region, including Kenya and Tanzania. But the biggest challenge they faced was integrating with the local uh, cultural lifestyle considerations, which meant that and I saw that closely and then realized that that specifically when you go to a new country and trying to open shop there, you would need to align some of these perspectives which are very specific to that region. For example, what are the cultural preferences? What are the specific social setups that you need to be thoughtful of, and they play a big role in you scaling up your business in these new markets. So this is just a quick thought for you to think about and consider while you're opening shop in these markets if you are coming from outside. So I think that's it for me. uh, we can move to the next one, to Asma, I think.
Thank you so much, Vibehav. That was really useful. And then we'll indeed move to Asma.
Hi, is everyone hearing me very well? Hello?
I can hear you, Asma. Yes.
Perfect, perfect. Well, first of all, I would like to thank you so much, Yetsuki, for the invitation, for being one of the panelists, and thank you so much also for my colleague, Vibha, for his really interesting presentation. I learned a lot from these 10 minutes about market myself. I would totally ask more questions later. I would like to I know I don't have a lot of slides, but I really wanted to hear more the questions of the participant than anything else. I would like to tell you that I'm spending my 10 minutes as follows. I'm going to give you a brief presentation of myself. I'm going to then talk a little bit about general trends about the market, about mostly the North African and the Middle East market. I will talk about what impact the market and what are the general trends, and then I will also talk about the lifestyle and cultural consideration that you entrepreneurs should really take into consideration when thinking of starting a business in the Middle East and North Africa. So briefly, I'm actually a program manager at the Corporation of Entrepreneurs in Quebec, General Contractors. I work for in the construction industry for the moment. Basically what I do day to day is helping entrepreneurs dealing with organizational and operation management with their company, as well as vocational trainings for their employees. I would say that my strengths are really into offering consulting, change management, operations, and really leading HR, departments in the company. What I also do part-time / full-time is that I have a company in Tunisia that really tries to help Tunisian women insert themselves in the Tunisian market and make sure that they will work very well with their startups or entrepreneurs. I really have, it's an NGO that I'm leading with few co-workers in Tunisia. We're trying to basically offer solutions and alternatives for women who would like to start their own company in the depends on whatever field that they're interested in. So we offer them like training, we offer them tools, and we also try to put them to network with people who could help them, investors, potential investors, to help them grow their business. So basically that's what I do together with my current job. Now let's move to the general trends about the market. So Yetsuki, if we could move to the second slide, please. So I presented here a chart from the it's from the Crunchbase News. It's basically a 2018 distribution of deals by geography. Obviously, it doesn't include all the countries of the North African Middle East area, but it includes basically the big ones. So based on Magnus 2018 Venture Investment Summary, we see that this is basically the distribution of startups in the UAE, Egypt, Lebanon, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Tunisia, Bahrain, Oman, and among other countries. What I could say about the North African / Middle East general trend is that in 2018, 31 million people visited the North Africa region, but this number was not actually returned to the levels of 2010 because of political, situation. So as we all know, in 2011, there was the Arab Spring that actually, it was like a lot of protests that brought instability to the region, and it also reduced the appeal of international visitors. That affected a lot the market in general. And we realized that the Arab Spring kind of pushed people, or let's say investors, to go to opt for other countries because they perceived them safer. Also, over 2/3 of arrivals into North Africa are for leisure purposes. So there is no more, well, I don't say there is no more investment. There is still investment in the market, but the North African region really bases its economy a lot on tourism. And so given the instability, the political instability, it kind of impacted the market a little bit. The same goes for, startups or people who decided to open their businesses. They changed the fact that they based their investment elsewhere, because when I say elsewhere, it means that, for instance, some investors who had companies in Tunisia, they decided to go to Morocco, which means that the Morocco market exploded because there are more investors who decided to go there because it's perceived safer. So it worked in a good way for the economy in Morocco, maybe not in a greater way for the economy in Tunisia, etc., because the fact that there is instability in the country starting from the 2010, 2011, it kind of like impacted the market. We also noticed that the type of economy trade changed over time. So before, people used to really rely a lot on tourism, for instance, in North Africa, Egypt, Lebanon, Algeria. With what's happening, the political trends, now people are more focused on alternative businesses. So we noticed that thanks to the, well, it could be thanks to, it could be not really thanks to the fact that there is political instability, there is a new market that's to be explored, for instance, digital market. So with the globalization and everything, there is new businesses that are actually being brought into the North African and Middle East region. People are thinking more about how could they basically make their lives better, what kind of businesses or investment they could do in order to basically make more money, like make sure that their business goes well, but also face the fact that there is a political instability and there is not a certainty that their business could actually go stronger over the time. So we noticed that there is a lot of like investment in digital market and digital marketing. A lot of new markets are being explored in the North Africa, in the MENA region. The fact that there are the natural resources market part is not really, it depends on the country, of course, but if we're talking about North Africa, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, there isn't, well, for Tunisia, there isn't a lot of natural resources market to explore, so there is definitely no growth in that part of the market. Whereas, for instance, for Algeria and Morocco, we noticed that there are a little bit of growth from that part. I would like to talk a little bit more still on the same slide for like the strengths of the North African Middle East market. There's definitely, after the, even though there was political instability and there was a lot of social instability as well, we have noticed that there is a diversified economy. People kind of been pushed to go to alternatives to basically sustain the economy of the country. For instance, I take the example of Tunisia. The whole economy used to rely a lot on tourism, but after the Arab Spring, people are like trying to create alternatives to make the market more stable. So they're going for digital marketing, or they're going also for outsourcing or investment. For instance, for startups, we see a lot of like, if I talk about the numbers for like women who would like to make their own startup in rural area, there are a lot of women who are thinking, well, we could maybe we could get our company better if we try to work more on social media and really equip ourselves and work on the sources that we have. So people are no longer thinking about tourism as the first source of investment. They're trying to go to see if they're relying on their skills and trying to make sure that they could bring something to the market. There's also, among the young generation, the fact that they're trying to rely more and more on digital marketing, social media, YouTube, bring like Instagram, all these tools to make sure that they're trying to bring a new vibe to the overall market. We also notice in terms of strength that there is a lot of new vocational training based on encouraging people to work on their entrepreneurial skills. Also, there are a lot of NGOs that are investing in women and younger generation to push them to like try to find another type of source of income instead of the 9-to-5 kind of style. There is also a bit of work on the bureaucracy in terms of investors. If you're trying to open your startup, we notice that the government are trying to make things better. I would push this last example to weaknesses, because I would say that there's still a lot of issues that you could be faced with when you're trying to open your own startup or as an investor. Well, I should recorrect myself. It's an issue if you're someone who, for instance, a Tunisian who would like to open a business in Tunisia. But if you're an international investor, there are a lot of doors that's open to you. So the bureaucracy goes kind of one-sided bureaucracy. It's kind of hard for people from the country to start their own business. But if you're like an international investor who's thinking of starting the business, there are a lot of possibilities and like tax breaks that the government offers in the North African Middle East region. The opportunities, I would say that for the North African Middle East region, there is a lot of opportunities in terms of digital marketing. I know I've been saying this a lot, but I've really noticed within the few years that there is a lot of openness from people to invest in transforming the workplaces into like digital, using technology. And when I say digital, it doesn't mean like using technology, for instance, as like, bringing machines for the manufacturing sector, or like using email, or like using social media or something like. I really mean more like trying to make the work easier by bringing digital solutions for some problems that the region is going through, like the fact that some North African countries, they have a little bit of imbalance in terms of like sharing resources. So you have a lot of either like extra wealthy people and then you have poor people. So we're trying to use technology to bridge the gap between these two social classes. I would totally go for the next slide, which is my last slide, please. And here I would totally talk to you a little bit about the cultural and lifestyle considerations. So if you were talking about the cultural preferences, I'm certainly here referring to cultural preferences in terms of the business. I'm not talking about social life. I would say that people are in the North Africa region more than the Middle East. They're kind of more open to have diversified people from diverse investment regions. When it comes to the Middle East, we should totally, when we're starting to think about opening a business there, to obtain a clear and detailed insight into new developments in basically, like, I would say, go to popular and well-established destinations first. So make sure that you actually studied, you've done your data analysis to explore the future trends related to how it works in that specific country or region, because some people would think that some trends are not really acceptable socially nor professionally. So I would say that make sure you did your market research before going there. In terms of linguistic, obviously, I would say all North Africa / Middle East speak Arabic, but there is definitely different dialects. And I would say that the advantage of the linguistic thing is that all these people who are actually dealing with North Africa and Middle East, you have the luxury to get English or French as a second language. And most people who are in the business or in the investment industry, they would totally be able to communicate with you with English and French. So there is no complication in that matter. There's definitely an exception. So for instance, if we're talking about the UAE, you better be equipped with a translator with you, because they're definitely going to be Arabic only. However, things are changing. So I would say that it depends on the sector you're thinking of integrating and the company you're thinking of getting into. There's definitely the exception of having someone who would totally speak English or French with you. It's mostly with the Middle East English, I would say, the language that could come second. Starting from after the Arab Spring, I would say same is going for the North Africa region. However, not fully. So French is still more like as of a second language in there. For the education level, I would say that people are very educated in most cases. So usually, since the education is free in North Africa and the Middle East, and when I say free, it means you don't pay exorbitant money, like for instance, Canada or the United States. It's just like a contribution. So definitely there are a lot of people with master's degree and bachelor's degree. The only issue is giving after the instability with the what's happening, the Arab Spring, the Syria issues, all these political instabilities, those countries are kind of losing people who are who have a very highly educated status. They're leaving abroad, so there is kind of something to be said for that. But overall, at least I could say with certainty for the North African market, people are, it's highly unlikely that you'll be dealing with someone who doesn't have a master's degree or at least a bachelor's degree, because we value people in the North Africa / MENA region, they really value a lot of education, and it doesn't really cost money to educate someone. I would say that religion doesn't really play a big factor in terms of investing or starting a business in the North Africa region. However, be aware that most of these countries are a Muslim country, and they really and they try to follow certain values from Islam. So when I say they try to follow some certain values, I mean, like, for instance, interest is kind of highly disregarded when it comes to getting a loan or something. But there are different ways of getting loans without paying interest. which is called the Islamic financial system. So there are a few things to take into consideration. Not all banks, though, in the North Africa / Middle East region deal with the they have definitely Western ways of doing, like, for instance, lending money, loans, etc. So it's not really a factor that could be really problematic for people who are thinking of starting a business in those regions, but just, so you know about it. In terms of values and ethics, I would say that this is something that people would really consider kind of shocking sometimes, at least I could talk about Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia in this point in particular, when it comes to how people are so laid back. So, like, it's when I say laid back, I mean there is no consideration of time. So, for instance, if you had a meeting at 9 a.m., most likely it's going to be a meeting at 10 a.m. But it's not a disrespect. It's not as disrespect. It's really people in those regions don't really have. We don't value time as much as it is perceived, for instance, in the West, because I know that people are very strict about their time, etc. So do not be shocked or surprised if, for instance, sometimes you had an appointment with someone and they never respected. It's not really about you. It's mostly kind of the trend in the region. Also, when it comes to the attire and what people wear, usually people aren't very suit and tie kind of a thing when it comes to business. It's trying to change right now, the vibe. But it depends on the sector. Again, it really depends on the sector, it depends on the country, but it's definitely something you got to keep in mind. If, for instance, you're thinking of expanding your business for Tunisia, don't be surprised if someone comes in with jeans and like a sweater or something like that. I would say it's not really surprising that you would have to deal with someone who's not really paying attention to what they're supposed to wear, etc.
Hi, Asma. I'm really sorry. I got so lost in hearing all these very interesting things about these markets. I just want to make sure that we have enough time for Perla's introduction and then the questions. So
I'm actually done.
Okay, well then it's perfect timing. So sorry to interrupt.
Don't worry about it. That was my last intervention. I was gonna say for technology, well, as I said, it's like kind of the trend, and if you have more questions, please feel free to ask. And I was gonna give the space for Perla.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And yeah, hopefully people will have many more questions for you after this last bit. So I will now hand over to Perla.
Hello, hi everybody. Thanks for the invitation. Thank you to the Cherry Blair Foundation, to Jetske, to my co-panelists, Baiba and Asma. Sorry for my pronunciation. Well, for preparing for this brief talk, it was very interesting because in my previous life, I worked on international trade rules and trade policy for a few years, based in Geneva. And since 2010, I've been living in Mexico City. So I would like to talk briefly on the new scenario for North America, which is the updated version of NAFTA, now called CUSMA or TEMEC in Spanish, which is the Canada, US, and Mexico agreement, which according to the different procedures, this new set of rules and standards will enter into force around June or July. We are just waiting for the approval by Canada. So I will briefly, if we can go to the next slide, please, briefly talk about why is it important to, in terms of growth for our businesses as women entrepreneurs, go and see different markets and work on our internationalization strategy. I looked into the previous panel a few weeks ago, and it was very interesting to see the different criteria that we have to take into consideration before jumping into international markets. No, actually, this is how Boulder, my company, started, because we wanted to, and we want to increase the number of women in international trade. Because as women entrepreneurs, we face different challenges, such as access to finance, such as access to mentors and powerful networks. The Cherry Blair Foundation is doing an incredible job in that regard, but also in terms of quality business opportunities in which international trade can offer a great basis for growth and for getting improved economic returns, higher quality business opportunity, access to international networking, and that's why it's great to have a space to talk about these international opportunities for women entrepreneurs. Nowadays, probably you discussed this in the previous panel, just 1 out of 5 companies participating in international trade is led by a woman. No, so we have a huge room for improvement, and international initiatives such as She Trades, but also Connect Americas in Latin America, led by the Inter-American Development Bank, are doing great efforts in order to improve those numbers and have more women not only leading these companies but also participating in exporting sectors. No? So can we go to the next slide? So in terms of North America, well, we're talking here about one of the most competitive regions in the world. There are many different rules in this improved version of NAFTA, which probably you recall that this revision work started with the presidency of Donald Trump. No, he said, or one of his statements at that point was that NAFTA was one of the worst trade agreements ever, no, and that he was going to make all the effort to change those rules for American workers. And well, a few years after, we have a new agreement, which is now supposed to be. I was hearing some of the latest declarations by the U.S. government, and they are saying that this is the best trade agreement ever. So we'll see. We are pending on the implementation. But in terms of North America, we're talking about, as I said, one of the most competitive regions, highly integrated, open economies, democracies. Even though we have had some changes in terms of administrations, but pretty much liberal thought leaders, no? So it's, I mean, in terms of culturally speaking, and in terms of values, we are 3 very different countries, but in terms of regional integration, as we will see in the next slides, we are pretty much integrated. And well, this started in 1994 now, so we have been married for almost 3 decades, and trade in terms of goods, it's pretty much integrated. And in terms of services, there are still many avenues to be discovered, because nowadays for these 3 countries, trade on services represents more than 60% of trade. For Mexico, 77% for the US, and 70% for Canada. So it depends on which sector you are working on, if it's goods or if it's services, but it's a blooming region in that regard. So can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah, so hope you can see this. This is pretty much the trade balance and the numbers in terms of exports and imports from these three countries. Probably it would be more interesting to go to the next slide where you can see. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yes, where you can see what are the goods that the U.S., Canada, and Mexico export and import more. So as you can see here, in terms of exports, the U.S. Um, based its economy a lot on oil and gas, cars, in which, by the way, we have new rules of origin, sorry, in which under the new rules of this CUSMA agreement, now the 62.5% rule of origin for cars is now turning to 75% of regional content, and pretty much the rationale behind this is that the U.S. mostly made a great effort and was very strong in terms of bringing back employment to the U.S. and, well, firstly, and then to NAFTA, and it was pretty much motivated by the competition with China and outsourcing, and then we can continue to where the U.S. export its goods, So we can see there Mexico, of course, Canada, but also China, Japan, and some other countries. I found these charts very interesting. And regarding imports, well, the picture is similar, but we can find some changes there in terms of, as we know, the level of imports that the U.S. Receives from China, and then to a less extent from Mexico and Canada. Next slide, please. We're running out of time. You tell me when I'm trying to respect my 10 minutes, but please let me know if you need anything. Jetski. And then with Canada, well, again, you can see here the composition of the exports and imports, and well, here, for example, it's very interesting how Canada, it's as it is the case of Mexico, which sends more than 70% of its exports in terms of goods to the U.S. Here you can see the same scenario for Canada, with 46%. Actually, there is a provision in the new agreement by which Canada needs, and I think it's also the same case with Mexico, needs approval from the U.S. its agreement in terms of negotiating with other economies, namely China, And in this geopolitical scenario in terms of trade agreements, it's very interesting how this agreement, it will, in principle, enter into force in June, July this year. But on the other hand, the other very big agreement, which is the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which is led by China mostly, and that integrates economies from Asia and Southeast Asia. It's supposed to enter into force as well this year, So, and by this agreement, around 90% of tariffs, of the universe of goods will be eliminated, So we will see, in terms of an entrepreneur exploring international markets, I would say that we need to look into the rules, the roadmap of different free trade agreements, because these three countries have a huge number of trade agreements. So it depends where are you based, your nationality, in terms of goods, But in terms of services, we can be much more creative depending on the different modes of delivering services, We can go to the next slide. So that's one thing that as women entrepreneurs, we have to take into account, the rules, but also in terms of trade facilitation, technical barriers to trade in terms of goods more specifically. but also in terms of non technical barriers to trade in terms of permits, how easy or not is to do business. In general terms, these three countries rank well in the doing business report by the World Bank. There are considerable differences in Mexico, but for example, the National Association of Entrepreneurs in Mexico has done a very important job in terms of how to incorporate a company in just one day at zero cost, no? For example, and there's another proposition on how to extinguish companies also at a very low cost, no? Because those were barriers that are not written in these trade agreements, but in terms of you exploring, for example, the Mexican market, it's something that you have to take into consideration, no? Well, you can go into more details regarding the Mexican slide in terms of exports. As I said, 73% of our exports are gone to the U.S. And well, we import more than 55% of U.S. goods come to Mexico, no? And well, I referred to the rules of origin in terms of the automotive sector because it's a very important part of our trade, and it's one of the most integrated and dynamic sectors right now and in the years ahead. Next slide, please. One thing that we have to take into consideration is, well, we are talking about, for example, in the competitive ranking by the World Economic Forum, Mexico ranks, well, the US ranks in the second position, Canada in the 14th position, and Mexico in the 48th position. We have a great way to go in Mexico in terms of competitiveness. But in terms of gender equality, which is relevant to our conversation, considering that we are women entrepreneurs, we have certain differences. Canada ranks in the 19th position in the Global Gender Gap Index by the World Economic Forum as well. Mexico in the 25th position, and this is mostly because of the changes in terms of gender parity in the political system. And Canada and the US, I'm sorry, in the 53rd position, which is pretty much related to their care systems, in which women are not covered, and that care centers are not that well developed. It's a different economy. The social considerations in that regard are less seen. So this is something that we have to take into account as well, no? As entrepreneurs. I'm sorry. And in terms of rules on gender, we don't see any chapter in the new CUSMA agreement. And I consider that a lost opportunity, because if these three governments are willing and aiming to improve the participation of women entrepreneurs in these economies and in the digital economy in particular, I was expecting, and I'll expect to see more positive action and programs in that regard. So very quickly regarding the SWOT analysis, regarding strengths, we are talking about the economy size. I referred that. We'll see how the new agreement for North America has or not an interesting balance in relation with China and Southeast Asia. Infrastructure, democratic values, digital integration, innovation, those are values that you can fully see in the region. Entrepreneurship culture, well, that's pretty much the case in the US, and I would say that in the last 7 years, the entrepreneurship culture in Mexico has been blooming. Natural resources, well, Mexico, well, the three of them, but mostly Mexico is one of the most diverse countries, along with Peru and Colombia in Latin America. So there's potential in terms of those industries. No, it depends on where you are, but if it's in terms of green jobs, there's there are opportunities there. Weaknesses, inequality. We are talking here more about Mexico and the U.S. Corruption. Well, it happens in my country, but also a little bit in the north as well. War on terrorism, war on drugs. Those are not trivial topics in terms of considering all that for entrepreneurs. And well, of course, gender inequality. I already referred to those numbers. And opportunities, well, there's a new set of rules. So at least in principle, it will provide stronger opportunities for not only for traditional sectors, but also for the digital economy. There's a chapter in that regard. And I think, well, and this is part of Boulder's agenda, no, that diversity and becoming a real platform for in which feminist values are there. I think there's a huge potential for that, and that's the case, particularly these last weeks in Mexico. So we'll see whether the private sector and the public sector are making any real bets in terms of change. And well, in terms of threats, well, I said global standards and values for the 21st century. And in terms of threats, well, of course, China, not in terms of threat as such, but of course, no, the power that China and Asia, I'm sorry, are deploying in the last decade, 2 decades. And well, internal political imbalances, that's pretty much the case in every region, and production and consumption patterns. I'm referring particularly to the US. We don't see any climate change provisions in this new CUSMA, and we are aware of the lack of political support that climate change in. It's the case in Canada. It's not the case in Mexico with the current administration, and we know the position of Donald Trump regarding climate change. According to him, it doesn't exist. So that's pretty much my analysis or my contribution to this panel. Is there another slide? I don't recall. No, that's it. Thank you so much for your time and attention.
Thank you so much, Perla. That was very interesting, and glad to learn more about the markets in these 3 countries. So I apologize to everyone that we're slightly running over, but hopefully, if you'll be able to stay on, we can answer some questions, and otherwise, you can look at the recording to see if your question will be answered. So let me just get some questions on the screen. This is a question for Perla. How important is it to co-locate in a country to enter the market?
Yes, thank you. What do you mean by co-locate? Like share space? Can you hear me?
The person that asked this question, if you can write in the chat box, then we'll get back to this question once we get a bit more background. I will get another question on. We have another one for Perla. Based on the results you shared, would it be better for a Mexican company to apply to the market in the US or instead of Canada?
Yes, I think it would depend very much on your what you offer in terms of goods or services. And for example, now there are different tools. We can be in contact, Maria del Carmen. And I think it's pretty much it depends on what you offer and in terms also of logistics. Actually, what we're doing now with women exporters in terms of goods, they are producers of food and beverages. What we are doing first is to test the market, whether there's interest for their products. So we do this market access exercise, and then we go to the logistics and permits part. and then we can start sending their first containers to the US, for example. No, we have more experience with the US, but I'll be happy to help you in case you want to explore the Canadian market. And actually, Asma, no, as well, is based in Canada, if I remember correctly.
Thank you so much, Perla. Then we have a question for VibeHub. Where can I easily find what kind of grants are available in the markets, I'm assuming?
So, I mean, to answer that, and I saw a few other questions, and I'll just answer both of them together. This is one, the grants, and second, what are the organizations that can support. I would actually start by looking at the website that, for example, for Kenya, it is called as the Kenyan. Let me open that name. Kenya National Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Then for Tanzania, it is called as the Tanzanian Chamber of Commerce, Industry and Agriculture. So my point in this here is that you start by looking at the commerce websites, and then you drill down based on the specific sector or specific area that you want to look into. So that's how I would go about it.
Thank you so much. Then we have a question for Asma. I don't know the financial sector well in the country I want to go to. Is it better to get a loan in my own country?
This is a good question. So if we're talking about getting a loan, I would need a specific. So are we talking about getting a loan for the company itself or trying to get funded in the country? And which country exactly in North Africa? Because if we're talking about getting a loan for the business and the business is established outside the North Africa, Middle East region, I would say it's better to start with having a little bit of money outside the country because you're going to start your business using this loan. But then again, maybe depending on which country you're interested in getting established at, maybe you could get a better loan / help, financial aid within the country itself once you arrive there. So it depends on the sector and the reason of why we're thinking of getting a loan.
Thank you so much, Asma. To the person that asked this question, if you have a bit more background, again, share it with us, and then we could potentially get some more tailored answers to you. I think this is a question for Perla, but this could be answered by everyone. Do you recommend working with a translator if you don't know the local language? And how do you know if they can be trusted? So let's start with Perla, and if any of the other panelists have an opinion, then please chime in.
Yes, I would say that, well, in terms of North America, you really need to have at least a good basis of English. Yes, you can rely on translators. But I've seen some women entrepreneurs going to these big summits, business summits in which they have B2B meetings with potential clients. And if they don't rely, if their English is not good, well, you better bring someone that understands your business and has a good English, because otherwise you will lose your time. And yes, I mean, if you want to explore international markets, again, English is a mandatory language. And if you are in that process, keep learning and have a team that has a good English understanding.
Thank you so much, Perla. Asma or VibeHub, do you have any inputs into this?
If VibeHub doesn't have an answer, I would like to pitch in. I would like to add, yes, English is definitely the language that goes as you stated, Perla, but I would say for the North African / MENA region, it's better to, especially if we're talking about the UAE, it's better to have a sworn translator, at least for legal reasons. So when you're signing documents or you're trying to conclude like a commission, or you're trying to make sure that you're trying to finalize an offer on something related to business, it's better to have a sworn translator. For I know that for the part that it's to trust, the trust part, you definitely could trust someone who has already his title like as a sworn translator or interpreter. So every country has its own like office that basically give you a list of all the trusted, or let's say sworn translator that you could actually pick from. But it's in the doubt, I would say it's better to have a local that could, like, when I say a local, I mean like a translator that knows the dialect of the region, because they should definitely help you understand few indirect messages. But in the doubt, it's all English always is basically like the language to use.
Thank you so much, Asma. I see we also got a question from Manisa about finding a local partner in branding and marketing in the UK. I'm assuming our panel won't be able to answer this because they're experts on other regions. So I'll just open it if anyone would know how to find this, and otherwise you can always send a message to mentoringintakes@CherieBlairFoundation.org, and we can see if there's an expert that could be able to help you, or you can post on our forum as well, of course. Then I think we'll oh, sorry.
Yes, very quickly. There are new platforms. I don't know if She Works has people in the UK, but platforms such as She Works, that it's empowering women that, particularly with digital jobs, women that can work from everywhere in the world. So you can actually, I've been working with a marketing expert that, and he's based in Brazil, no? So this entrepreneur, she's great. Silvina Moschini, she has a platform in which she employs only women, but also has another platform for digital jobs, digital nomads. So you can start not perhaps with the big marketing agency, but with someone that can give you support and consultancy, very specific for your business, and then you can grow from there.
Thank you so much, Perla. That was hopefully very useful to Manisa. So I think we'll have to conclude our session here. But as I said before, if you have any further questions, please send them to mentoringintakes@CherieBlairFoundation.org, and I will see if our panelists will be able to answer any further questions, or I can share them on the forum to see if we have anyone that can help us out. So thank you so much, first of all, to our speakers for sharing their expertise on these different markets. And I'm sure we would have been able to listen to them for hours and hours, but I think this was a very good introduction into these markets, and hopefully for all of the attendees, a good starting point for when they're starting to explore these markets. Also, thank you to our audience for attending, and even having the patience when we start a bit later, and also sticking around whilst we're running over. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day. The recording of this webinar will be shared on the forum soon, so you can always refer back to it. And I will also send you an evaluation for this session, and we would very much appreciate it if you could fill it in so we can continue to improve our webinars. I yeah, hope everyone has a great rest of the day wherever they are around the world. And thanks again to everyone for attending this session today and to continue our learning. So thank you very much. And hopefully we will see you at the next webinar, which will be at the end of March. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.